In the meantime, the 2011-2012 Auditor General's report on money spent by the South African government revealed that 24.8 billion rand of taxpayers' money was used wastefully by provincial departments and municipalities. The government has since announced several plans to revamp public services in an effort to improve delivery. Luyanda Majija investigates.
The South African government has made plans to give its public services a much-needed facelift, as only 21% of government entities passed the latest audit. And in a State of the Nation address last month, South African President Jacob Zuma emphasized the country's commitment to fighting corruption.
Government continues to wage a war against corruption. I've since 2009 signed 34 proclamations directing the SIU to investigate allegations of corruption, fraud, or maladministration in various government departments and state entities. We are cracking down on corruption, tender fraud, and price fixing in the infrastructure program.
According to the South African Institute for Race Relations, the 24.8 billion rand unaccounted for could have been used to build 400 schools, educate 2.5 million pupils for 1 year, and fund 1.2 million university students. The amount is equivalent to 7.4 million in child support grants and could also have been used to build 550 new prisons.
The first thing that people ask, even when government introduce something that is manifestly for the public good, is what's in it for you? Who's really gaining from this? And when you reach a situation like that, you've reached a very serious governance problem, and its manifestations can be very severe as well. I think that the coincidence between the growing outrage and concern about corruption on the one hand, and the spate of endless so-called service delivery protests on the other hand are another thing. I mean, they're partly about inequality and poverty and the effects of it, there's no doubt about that. But they're also about people believing that they're not getting these services because somebody else is the money or the resources for those services are being diverted elsewhere. They just do not trust government.
KPMG's Corruption Perception Barometer for English-speaking African countries, which is due for release to the public on the 17th of April, showed a decrease in the incidence of corruption reported in the media, with countries like Kenya topping the list. However, the value of reported cases is still high.
Africa used to be a backwater. Companies, multinationals would come in here and come into African locations and behave in a way that they wouldn't dream of behaving back in their home country because it was isolated. That's not the case anymore. Firstly, a lot of regulation and legislation has got multi-jurisdictional application.
Other government interventions include clamping down on government employees or their relatives procuring business deals from the state. Another plan of action involves taking public service officials back to school.
We've come to the determination that we need to professionalize the public service. And in order to do that, we need to have a dedicated school that will concentrate on creating the kind of cadre that we can count on, who will put people first with a kind of culture that will deliver services to our people conscientiously, that will be committed to the government of the day. And by October, we will have a fully fledged school of government. And we will be in collaboration with various academic institutions that offer courses that might be relevant to us to work together with us.
While government sees this as a viable solution to combating corruption, more can be done.
Changes in the way in which they declare and report on their activities, on their wealth, on their sources of income. I think these are going to become very important factors in who people choose to lead their ruling parties, all their parties, who people choose to lead their country, their provinces, their city councils. We want to make those important factors. We want to make leaders believe that that engaging in corruption or even averting your eyes from corruption because it's politically convenient to do so is a sort of career limiting option if you want to be elected and appointed to leadership positions.
The legal issues around corruption are also very complicated, and it is difficult to find individuals guilty of such offences.
Corruption is a complicated offence. There is no innocent participant in a corrupt transaction. So there's no, you don't have the tangible physical evidence of the crime. You don't have the fingerprint and the murder weapon and the eyewitness statement. It's someone from within the transaction has to give it up. So it's complicated to investigate. It's complicated to prosecute, and I think with the resource restrictions that we have in our investigative and prosecution agencies, it does reduce the chances of there being a successful prosecution.
The relationship between the private sector and the state is also seen as problematic.
I don't think one should discount entirely the role that the private sector plays. It does require the payer of a bribe. It's like trying to commit adultery on your own. It's not easy, and while there is a lot of nepotism and incestuous relationships in contracting.
Corruption in South Africa and on the rest of the continent has underlying sources which will take much longer than a few audits to tackle.
I think that there is an element of arrogance, and historically it was definitely the case that they could get away with it. They're dealing with a less sophisticated environment or a less sophisticated market.
The fact that people feel that corruption is like the air, you can't get rid of it, is a big problem. There are a lot of grey areas, and the grey areas really concern, the whole question of criminal conduct. I mean, some corruption amounts to serious criminal conduct. Other amounts to, I suppose, what would be called in kind of rather pompous terms, conduct unbecoming a public servant or a public institution.